So, hello and welcome to our 33rd session in our Tarot on videos, recorded during the time of the pandemic of 2020. Today is 16th of April 2020. Our country here in England, where I'm recording this, has just been placed under a further extension of a 3-week lockdown. And we have just gone through 3 weeks, so I'm assuming that this is now a decent halfway point through the lockdown measures that have been taken. It's been fascinating to watch some of the social engineering, some of the interesting ways of communicating and working out how people would respond to these sorts of social measures. And I hope the social measures that are in place wherever you may be living here in the group, Marcy, Derek, Lisa, Michael, Lily, Diane, Denny, everyone else, are having their desired impact, and that we are not going through too much in order to endure the isolation, the social distancing, and the various other measures that are currently in place, restricting currently half of humanity are under some form of lockdown. So again, it's different state by state, country by country, area by area, but I think it is having some sort of effect. So I'd like to start today just with a moment's contemplation. We're in the middle of this particular long tunnel, and I think we should just draw a breath for a moment and consider where we've got to, and the fact that sometimes in the middle of the tunnel you can't see where you've come from, you can't even see if there's a way out, but that's because we know at least we're in the middle of the tunnel when it is that dark. And I'd like to give you a little saying, or perhaps it's a greeting or a blessing or a contemplation that I first introduced in Theosophy, which is this: the world is bound by invisible knots. You either speak with honey on your lips from the voice of, from the book of clouds, echoing the voice of living fire in the trembling darkness, or you do not. There is no such thing as a halfway oracle. And I think it's incumbent on us at this time to speak, I was going to say our truth, but that sounds a bit cliched. I prefer to speak with honey on your lips from the book of clouds, echoing the voice of the living fire in the trembling darkness, because then it sounds as magnificent as it should. So that's where we're at the moment, and I would like to share with you the two cards that I have for my personal contemplation today, which were quite nice because I managed to find some light actually shining on some stonework that came in through this when I moved it this way, and the light sort of bent automatically on the floor to actually incorporate the stones on the other side. So my saying for this was that light finds its own direction. Light always finds its own direction. And I think that was a nice contemplation when we're in the middle of this sort of tunnel, the fact that there is light at the end of it, quite literally. It's almost like that's a train going along, and we might not be able to see the light from behind, but we're certainly headed towards it. And I'd like to think that that is the case at the moment. So today we're going to have a quick recap of some of the NLP stuff that we've been doing. We are going to have a talk about anchoring and resource states and amplification, some NLP techniques I use in readings, and we're also going to start to introduce some time-space work as well, some time-space work. Now, in some books, this is called like timeline work, but in my view of it is always time space, and it's another thing to start to listen to look out for with other people, particularly kids as well. It's very important to and how kids manage their time and maintain it, because it is slightly different as we grow up how time actually works in terms of memory, in terms of novelty. One of the current thinkings about the reason why time seems to go more quickly as you get older is because the brain marks time by the number of things that are happening. And so if you're falling off a building and your life flashes before your eyes, or you suddenly trip in almost in front of a car and things seem to go in slow motion, it's because the brain is rapidly processing a lot of danger signals, and as a result it thinks that a lot of time has passed because the number of things that has happened should happen in this space of time, when in fact they're happening in that space of time. So the brain gets a bit confused and you think that time is moving slowly. Interestingly enough, as we get older, a lot of things like seeing the sun in the morning, which should be nonetheless a miracle every morning, when you think about what's happening with the Earth going around the sun and this big ball of hydrogen on fire and stuff, and we're going around it. It should be a miracle every day, but we get used to it. So there is no novelty. There's no novelty in tying our shoelaces or having ice cream even. And so the brain over time, because there's no novelty, thinks that hardly any time is passing, when in fact there is a lot of time passing, or the same amount of time is passing. So the trick is, if you want to feel as if time is not passing quickly, then add more novelty. Just do slightly different things every day. Open the doors with your left hand, not your right hand. Tie your shoelaces from one shoe to another in a different order. Go and do something very different. Learn something new. Adding novelty into your life will actually extend the amount of time that you think you're experiencing. And it's as simple as that. Okay, so we are going to talk about time and the wonders of time. And it's something that I think is very important. In Western esotericism, I do believe that if you change the philosopher's stone in alchemy to the word time, every time it appears, then it still makes sense. If you think that alchemy is about our relationship to time through symbolism, then it unlocks an awful lot of the alchemical texts. When they talk about a secret that's in plain sight, a gold that is not the common gold, a mercurial substance that you can apply to other things and it transforms them. All of these things apply to time. And yet, if you said the secret is time, yes, a trip to the DMV feels like a year. There's a lot of occasions that can feel like a year. But if you said to someone the secret of existence is time, they go, yeah, so what? But if you encoded it in all of these mystical allegories, by the time you figure it out and go, my gosh, they mean time, it's actually more of a transformative experience, which is what tends to happen with initiation. Magically, that it may be a rather obvious fact that is stated within your initiation. For example, the sun shines at midnight, or Osiris is a black god, or whatever it might be. But in the context that it's delivered, it means an awful lot more, particularly if you've been prepared for that initiation. So time is a very important thing. Now, excuse me. We're going to look at resource states today. So I have my sort of magic clipboard with me. We're particularly going to look at this card on the Celtic cross, which I've talked about before as being, and if you've not seen the video we did on the Celtic cross, then skip back through the units and find the little video we did specifically on the positions of the Celtic cross. I tend to see this bottom card as the resource card because it's very important from a counselling, therapeutic, NLP, hypnotherapy point of view that the client has the resources that they need to make the changes that they want. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible for them. And this card to me always symbolises the resources. And you'll also recall from our 3-minute method of tarot learning that we can see each card in terms of, and this is a test if you remember, we see a card in 3 lights that are very easy to see from any picture. The resource, which we're talking about now, the challenge, and the lesson. Those 3 things. So we're specifically going to concentrate on the resource. So I'd like you to comment in the comments area if you're watching this live, or even if it's a recording, and then they'll bump it back up the Facebook feed and people all think, hang on, that was a year ago. Why has that come back up? So if you put it in now, a resource, a positive resource state. And I'll give you one example, curiosity. Curiosity is a very positive state to be in as a resource, because if you're curious, then you can learn, you're open, you're more confident, and so on. So to be in a state of curiosity is a very positive state. What other positive states are there? And this is for the people in the live class. If you're watching this live, then you'd like to make a comment, that'd be useful. And whilst you have to think about that and put any comments, we are going to be reading another short story from Italo, Calvino, Invisible Cities, as our bedtime story this evening. And I have a special one for tomorrow for our weekend reading from my favourite science fiction author, Philip K. Dick. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his Gnosticism and the way he saw the world. Philip K. Dick. Reflective, observation. Yeah, that's a good one. Backflower remedies. Now, there's an interesting thing. My stepmother was very much into the backflower remedies when it sort of almost first arose, really. Creativity, being fearless, being brave. So being fearless is a really important resource state. Flowing, yes, flow is there is a book on flow. There's also a film, isn't there, called Fearless, Jeff Bridges. I think it's called Fearless. It's about a survivor of a plane crash, and that is a beautiful, gorgeous film. If you ever want to see a really interesting, powerful film, and one that has a U2 song used to its most stunning crescendo, then yes, that's the film for you. Adaptable, oh, there's a good one. Adaptable, flexible, contemplative, accepting, that's a good resource state. So brilliant. So there's a load of really good, I feel good just reading them out. Wouldn't it be great to have all of these resource states of being accepting, being contemplative, being flexible, flowing, being imaginative, creative, and fearless and inventive, and being honest, being authentic. Those are all brilliant resource states. So thank you for those. Just read through them and sort of see if you can feel which one feels closest to you right now, which one resonates with you. For me, it's creative. I think creative, feeling that I want to be very creative at the moment, and that feels a very positive resource state. Okay, so those are positive resource states. And when we look at the cards, of course, our tarot cards, because we are looking at tarot, then each of these cards can be seen to embody some sort of resource. And so the resource state of this card, so relaxed is a good resource state. and intuitive. And in fact, this card may well be the resource state of intuition and dreams, having a vision, so visionary, inventive. Though I think the Page of Cups is probably the inventive one, whereas the Queen of Cups is more reflective. Open. So what other resource states are in this card? I think we probably named several of them actually. So being intuitive and being open, yeah, maybe being flexible, creative. All of those are sort of held within this card in some way or another. And she is being observant, even if she is, as Waite says, I think, someone who sees her own dreams clearly or something like that. He says in Pictorial Key that she's looking on her sort of grail, like it's actually a baptism lid, sort of chalice here. So she is, in effect, being baptized by the waves. So, excuse me. Oh, grace. I love that. Yeah. So grace. Excuse me. I'm just going to have a glass of water while. It'd be ideal if the screen had frozen whilst we were talking about flow. The universe has a sense of irony as well as humour. Okay, so we've got resource states in the card. Now, I wanted to talk about anchoring. NLP is sometimes credited with almost like Jedi-like mind powers, like you can read people's minds or somehow influence them in some way. And that's sort of partially true, but it's based on a bit of a misunderstanding about what hypnosis actually is. And with anchoring, that tends to be seen as part of the manipulation of NLP and some of these sort of mental powers that are said to come with studying NLP, particularly by some trainers. Now, just throw all of that away for the moment and imagine that what actually happens is, as part of change work, part of divination as well, we need to be, or ideally need to be, in rapport with our client. So that there has to be some empathy going on, like two tuning forks, that you resonate, and as you get closer to the client, they resonate at the same sort of frequency that you're resonating at. And in particular, that they resonate with the tarot cards as well, that there's a resonation that goes on, and then they resonate with that. And the best resonance is to a resource state. The best resonance is to a resource state. You want to, I think the Mentalist, as Marcy's saying, and various other shows do pick up on some readings of NLP. Even if they're only at a surface level. Derren Brown, for example, uses NLP, but actually he uses that instead of the sort of beautiful assistant or the distraction. I once spoiled, someone took me for their birthday to a Derren Brown show, and I sat there, and unfortunately, I think I spoilt it for them because I just said, oh, he's going to go and look at that next, and that's why he's going to do that, because there's carbon paper under that book, or he won't now move around that glass because actually that's fake glass, and that's why the other person won't touch it, and so on. And it was interesting watching him use NLP and various other sort of mental type things as a distraction to what are actually very old and very straightforward stage magic. And he's very, very skilled at it. And, that's to give him a lot of credit for actually repackaging a lot of things with NLP. But again, that does lead to slightly the wrong idea of what NLP and hypnotism are actually all about. So let's think more in terms of resonance, because sometimes when you go into a state with a client, then you actually end up resonating with them just as much as they're resonating with you or the cards. And what I like to make sure in a reading is that we have some resource state that resonates with the client. So if this was the card we were talking about, and that was in the resource position of the Celtic cross, or in some other position, this position at the bottom of the cross, that I use as the foundation or resource, if that was the Queen of Cups, or in another spread it was in an important position for that card, then I would want to do it like this. Either I would say to them to think of a time when they felt, and if you listen to the wording very carefully, most creative, okay? Not a time when they felt creative, but a time when they felt most creative. And you can do this in a pub conversation as well, or pub change work, as I call it, when we get let back out and the pubs are open and things like that. Does anyone remember that, actually going to these social meetings in public? Everyone used to get together in the same room, strangers and everything. It was very strange times. With that question, with actually saying, when did you feel most creative? What actually happens is what in NLP, by its fancy name, is called a transderivational search. Basically, you have to derive the most creative time of your life by going through every single memory, but you can't do that consciously in the time that you're given, so you do it unconsciously, and that sets up a very powerful state. So if I said to you, what was the most relaxing holiday you ever had? Yes, so this does maximize that resource, and it elicits it and amplifies it simultaneously, because whilst we're asking a question a bit like a stage magician, we're actually, with Ericksonian work, we're causing the other thing to happen implicitly in the unconscious. The person doesn't question what creative means, because we've asked them to find the most creative time in their life, or the most relaxing holiday. So in hypnotherapy, I might ask someone, when was a time and the place that you felt most relaxed? So as Diane's saying, we could also ask that as a question. Can you tell me the time and the place where you truly found most your bliss? What moment in your life to this point would you say you had most found your bliss? Now, to answer the question, your brain has to process bliss as a thing unconsciously, and then transderivationally search through every memory and match it like a bubble sort in a computer. Those were the days of old code programming, in order to come up with the most blissful time, or the most creative time. So don't waste the question to say, oh, when did you last feel happy? Ask, when was a time you felt most happy? When was a time you felt happy? Not the happiest, but most happy. And people can find new resources all of the time, but more importantly, they can model those from other people. If the person says, I've never felt happy, I don't argue with that. I don't say, oh, you must have done, like a normal person might. Oh, go on, you just think harder. I'll say, oh, okay, who would you say is most happy? From television, fictional characters, from books you've read, who is the most happiest person that you've ever known. Because again, I'm not after the answer to the question, I'm after their brain processing happiness, because they've got to do that in order to answer the question. And this is basically eliciting that state and amplifying it. Okay? So I might look at this card and say, right, so this card is your resource card, and she looks very creative. When was the time in your life that you felt most creative? Okay, and I'll wait for them to come up with an answer. If they say, I've never felt creative, then I'll say, who would you say is the most creative person you've ever heard about? Okay, so in both of those cases, they're having to do a search, but with creativity. Now, Erickson once had a client who he was unsure when she came into him what exactly had happened or what her particular situation was, but it was certainly to do with her body image and her relationship to men and things like this. And Erickson said to her, when you get out of the shower and you look at your arm, are there droplets of water on your arm or not? Okay, so he asked her that specific question. And however she answered was, no, the room is quite warm, or the room is quite cold, so yes, there's condensation. And he went on to then work with that sort of feeling of what is it like to have this water on your arm. Now, what he didn't say until he was interviewed about some of his client sessions a lot later was that he'd asked that question for one specific reason for the unconscious to process something without him having to talk about it or ask it, because that was part of her issue. In order to process stepping out of the shower or the bath and looking at your arm to see if there's any water on it, guess what? You are also in the state of processing unconsciously the fact that you're naked. Okay, so Erickson didn't want to immediately go with, how do you feel about your body image? Do you like people seeing you naked? Do you hate people seeing you naked? And so on. He asked her a very specific question in order for her unconscious to actually put her in a situation where she was naked. And then he could work with that without ever bringing it to the surface, quite literally. And that is a lot of what we do in a sort of neo-Ericksonian way. We mention things in passing, even though they're the most important things. We ask questions that have answers where we're not interested in the answer, we're interested in the way the person has to provide the answer to us. So asking, when did you feel most creative? Then the person has to process what creativity means to them. So if they say, as Den is saying, what about if they say, I can't remember? You can say a number of things. You could say, if you could remember, when would it be, do you think? Or even if you can't remember, what would it feel like to remember now when you were most creative? Or even better, because we're talking about creativity, I might say, well, can you create the feeling of what it would be like to remember? How would that feel? Because then they have to create something. So I'm actually inducing the state in them in order to answer that question. Again, we don't deny them their state. We never deny someone their state in certainly my approach of NLP. We never deny the state. We always incorporate it and utilize it. It is not our job, our role, to step inside and change someone's state. They have to do it. We have to provide opportunities, stepping stones that they might want to take in order to change their state. But a true state change is in the other person, not something we have done at them, to them, for them, or anything else. Okay, so that's a transderivational search by asking, when did you feel most creative? What else have we got? When did you feel most optimistic about the future? Were you young when you felt that, or were you older? So asking them that question, they have to process it. And I might say, so this card is like the adventurer card, about to go off on a journey. When did you feel most adventurous? Most adventurous. And then what we need to do is then anchor that feeling. So as the person talks about it, and we might amplify it by saying, using our, if you recall from a few days ago, our VACOG things, and modalities within those. If you don't know what those are, you'll need to go back and look at the videos and say, and what did it feel like to be that adventurous? Oh my gosh, so you went to Tanzania. Oh my gosh, what did it feel like to be that adventurous? Oh, did you go with other people? What was it hot? Oh, oh, the jungle. Oh my gosh, wow. So there must have been so many sounds. What do you remember about that? And what we're doing is we're using VACOG, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, to really put them into the state of adventuresomeness. And when they get to the peak of that state, and this is why we amplify it. So this is the opposite of what we're doing with the virus at the moment. We're not flattening the curve. We want to actually make it high. And when they get to the peak of the state, we anchor it by doing something. And it could be non-verbal, it could be a change of tone, or it could be a visual symbol. And so with the tarot cards, I usually tap the card. And I just tap it in a particular way. And I go, that's so exciting, or something like that. Just when they get to the peak of that moment. Okay. And I do that on the resource card or any other card that I'm going to use as a resource later on. I might say Tanzania in their voice or something like that, in order to echo it back and resonate at the peak of them. Usually they have their eyes closed and they go, yeah. And we went to this waterfall, and they'll just pause and they'll access it. And that is that peak moment. And I'll go, a waterfall. And I'll just echo it back. And that is what is called an anchor. And in NLP books and some courses and teachers and stuff, they do it very heavily. Like you have to tap people on the knee, or you have to sort of scratch your head, or all sorts of weird things. But it's far easier and far more natural just to do it resonating to the other person. And that's what also is part of rapport. And then a bit later on in their reading, when we might get to a challenge card, or an outcome card, or some situation, let's have a think. Let's take a card that looks like a challenge card. Here we go. So we might get to a card that's more challenging or something like this, and this is an ideal one for my example, strangely enough. And I will talk about the card and say this is the Five of Cups, crying over spilt milk, blah, 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 black clothes, bent shoulders, everything's terrible. And this water sort of flowing under the bridge, sort of flowing into the past. And just imagine over there, a waterfall. And I'll use exactly the same tonality, or tap the card and go, it's like that waterfall. And I'll immediately bring back their state from this card, where we were talking about the waterfall in Tanzania, anchored, someone's given us a good anchor, thank you, onto this card. So it then overlays it, and it provides a different metaphor for this card. Does that make sense? That you want to get a resource state, even if it's only, thank God I got here to the reading on time, or I managed to find somewhere to park, or any other resource state, you can actually amplify it, remember it, anchor it, usually at the peak of its description, and then trigger it, bring it back a bit later on when you need it. And I have a checklist that I give students on my NLP courses for the sort of outcome of a session. Do you know where they store time? Do you know, for example, at least one positive resource state? Do you know? And none of it has things like, do you know their issue? Do you know their case history? Do you know about their parents or their job or anything like that? That's not the sort of work that I do, which to some people's annoyance sometimes, but because it's different. I'm far more interested in the unconscious elements that are going on, because quite often the person has it's come to a hypnotherapist where they're last in the food chain. Usually they've tried other things, and where they're sort of last chance because they might as well give it a try, because what else have they got to lose? And so that's also a good resource state to actually then amplify as well. So I think it's a nice opportunity to go for the unconscious things. And quite often that's why people come to tarot card readers, because what else have they got to lose? They might as well have a tarot card reading. Not everyone comes to a tarot card reading like that, but when they do, it's pointless trying to recapitulate conscious methods, therapeutic methods, or anything else, because they probably tried those. And of course, you can ask, what else have you done about this issue? What else have you done about this situation? Now, there's only one thing I just want to add quickly before we do our bedtime story, because we, strangely enough, covered quite a lot in just this simple thing, is about timelines and time space. And I've drawn a little diagram here. If we assume that people think in terms of the future ahead of them or to their right, it doesn't really matter, but just generally ahead of them in some way or another. Quite often people can't see themselves getting from the past card to the future card. That's too big of a gap for them to see how they're going to get to the outcome or the future card, even with the resources that they have and the aim that you've given them in the upper card here. And however that is laid out in a particular reading, or even if you're sort of intuitively just laying out cards or using a metaphor or whatever else, whatever resource card you have got for the client needs to somehow be future paced. They need to see it in their future. Before they leave the room, they have to at least have one idea that they have some positive future. That's one of my rules anyway. Now, one way of doing that is not to put it in their future, but to put them in their future. And the second rule is that you don't put them in their future, you put them in their future's future, looking back at their future. Okay, now timeline work gets a bit crazy, but it's very easy to actually implement. And the way you implement it is in natural language patterns, and you do it like this. What do you think it will be like when you can look back a year after you've been that creative? Okay, what do you think it will be like to look back on the time that you are going to be most creative? Now, that may not make much sense consciously, but the unconscious can make an awful lot of sense of it. Because if I say to you now, remember yesterday, you can do it, I guess. Now, the interesting thing is in a minute, I'm going to tell you something else. I'm not going to tell it you yet, but in a minute, you're going to remember not only the thing that I'm going to tell you, but the fact that I asked you to remember yesterday and your memory of yesterday. Isn't that cool? So in a minute after that, I will then remind you that we remembered those things that even include at that point the thing that I haven't even told you yet. But in that moment, it will also include that thing as well. Because our brains are, and this is the thing I'm going to tell you, consciously and unconsciously processing time in a miraculous way, a bit like the sun coming up every morning because the earth is going round it, not the other way around, all of the time, in the most miraculous way. And you can utilize that in hypnotherapy very powerfully through confusional techniques. But when you ask someone, what will it be like in the future? To look back on the time that you are going to be most creative. Let's see if we can get that more in focus. Let's try this. There we go, brilliant. Okay, so if they are, and I'm going to do this sort of backwards to front ways, here we go. If they are here now, instead of trying to get them to move to their future, we actually skip them ahead to their future's future so that they can imagine looking back at them being successful. Because they can't deny that that's imagination. Whereas there, they can deny themselves the opportunity to think that they could get there. But if we tell them to imagine the time when they're looking back on it, they have to imagine it. They actually have to imagine it. So it's far easier to plant the resource state in the future, plant them beyond the resource state, and get them to remember it in their own future. It's a load easier because, again, you go hypnotherapy, you go beyond the conscious filter and censorship mechanism straight into the unconscious. And it gives them a lot more drive to get there because they've already remembered themselves having succeeded. It's a way top athletes do. What they do is they visualize themselves going over the finish line, and then they work out every stage backwards in reverse as to how they're going to get there first. And that's how they do it, because that's how the brain works. Aha, future perfect progressive. Yes, yeah, and you add in some subject clauses and things like that and get some I and yous and thems and theys all into that, then yes, you can really go way beyond the conscious filter with all of that. Okay, so then I would say to the person, imagine what it's going to be like looking back on all of the adventures you're going to have. What will that be like? Okay, what will that be like? And it's a lot easier to do it that way. And after a while, it gets just built into your natural language as you practice these things by listening. Listen to when other people do it. Other people do this all of the time. They say, "Oh, you'll look back at this time and you won't realize just how happy you should have been," or something like that. You'll look back at this time and realize that you should have been more happy now. And people play around with time quite naturally. But if you learn to listen first, particularly people who get you depressed, or people who cheer you up or are creative or inspire you. There's certain people when you're around them and you just get really sort of mind blown and open and creative and things like that. And then you think, how did they speak? What did they say? I mean, they don't come up to you and inject you with some sort of drug unless they do. But generally speaking, people don't do that. It's just what they say and how they say it. So if there's someone who is all very depressing and you get very tired when they leave the room every single time, listen to them. They're going to be a good example of how to use language to change someone's state. They'll be a very good example of that. Now, someone remind me tomorrow to tell you about the vampire in the steam room. And I'll tell you a story about how language can be very powerful. But for now, having talked about resource states, listening to resource states, anchoring them, using them in a tarot card reading, And we'll come back to more examples of that as we go along. I'd like to leave us for this evening with our bedtime story, if I may. I can't quite compete with Tom Hardy reading children's bedtime stories, but I will do my best. So, this is part of the section on trading cities, because each of the cities in Invisible Cities is grouped together. Yes, emotional vampires. I'll tell you a classic story. I'm sure we all have classic stories of emotional vampires. Perhaps we can share those tomorrow. Oh, and incidentally, talking sharing things, I'm going to set up a poll for the brilliant ideas that we've had for our little cabal, our little group of COVID-19 pandemic storytellers, tarot readers, whatever we are as a group at the moment, because we're sort of 33 days into this now, so we should have a name for ourselves. So we'll see how we I'll put the best of them up as a poll in the Facebook group. If you don't know what that's about, go and have a look in the Facebook group, add your own suggestion for our group name, and we'll have a group vote on it. That'll be quite fun. When he enters the territory of which Eutropia is the capital, the traveller sees not one city, but many, of equal size and not unlike one another, scattered over a vast rolling plateau. Eutropia is not one, but all these cities together. Only one is inhabited at a time, the others are empty, and this process is carried out in rotation. Now, I shall tell you how. On the day when Eutropia's inhabitants feel the grip of weariness, and no one can bear any longer his job, his relatives, his house, and his life, debts, the people he must greet or who greet him, then the whole citizenry, the whole lot of citizens decides to move to the next city, which is there waiting for them, empty and good as new. There, each will take up a new job, a different wife, will see another landscape on opening his window, and will spend his time with different pastimes, friends, and gossip. So their life is renewed from move to move, among cities whose exposure or declivity or streams or winds make each site somehow different from the others. Since their society is ordered without great distinctions of wealth or authority, the passage from one function to another takes place almost without jolts. Variety is guaranteed by the multiple assignments, so that in the span of a lifetime, a man really returns to the job that has already been his. Thus, the city repeats its life, identical, shifting up and down on its empty chessboard. The inhabitants repeat the same scenes with the actions changed. They repeat the same speeches with variously combined accents. They open alternate mouths in identical yawns. Alone, among all the cities in the empire, Eutropia remains always the same. Mercury, god of the fickle, to whom the city is sacred, worked this ambiguous miracle. The City of Eutropia in Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. So I'd like to wish you all a very good evening, and thank you for indulging our group with your time and attention. I look forward to meeting up with us all tomorrow, and perhaps we'll have a group name by then, and we can continue through probably the second half of our tunnel through the plains of Pandemos. Okay, thanks a lot for your time and attention. Any questions, just ask them in the Facebook group. Happy to answer them. And look after yourselves and look after each other. Stay sane and stay safe. Bye for now, everyone.